They say the devil's in the details, and if that's true, then my job is dancing with demons. My name is Detective Sam Thorne. Been with the force for 15 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people lie. The trick is knowing how to find the truth buried underneath all that bull. I've stared into the eyes of killers, thieves, and con artists. I've seen the faces of those who think they can get away with it all, hide behind their money or their charm, but I've never met one who could outrun the truth. They think they can hide the bodies, wipe the fingerprints, but the truth is always right there. You just have to know where to look. And that's what I'm good at. The case landed on my desk on a Monday morning, the kind of morning where the sun felt like it had better places to be. The weather had that dull, gray quality, a low-hanging fog that seemed to swallow up the city before the day had even started. It wasn't just the gloomy sky that made the air feel thick, it was the news I was about to get. The victim was a journalist, Rachel Monroe, 32, found dead in her apartment. Neighbors called it in after hearing shouting late at night followed by an eerie silence. Cause of death? Strangulation. There were no signs of forced entry, which meant one thing: she knew her killer. I've worked homicides before, but there was something different about this one. Journalists, they have a way of digging up the kind of dirt that gets people killed. I couldn't help but think that maybe Rachel Monroe had crossed a line, dug a little too deep into something powerful. And someone wanted her silenced. But who? And why? I had to find out. I had to dig deeper, past the surface. First stop was the crime scene. Rachel's apartment was small, clean, and organized, the kind of place where every item had its place. Everything about it was quiet, understated. It almost looked as if no one had lived there at all. Yet there were a few signs of struggle. The coffee table was overturned, its contents scattered across the floor. Shards of glass lay near the couch, evidence of a violent scuffle. Yet there was no blood. No sign of a prolonged fight. Whoever had done this had gotten close, too close, and had strangled her quickly, efficiently. I stood there for a moment, staring at the lifeless body. The silence in the room was almost suffocating. It felt wrong. Like I was intruding on a story that wasn't mine to tell. But it was now. And I wasn't about to let it go. Her laptop was gone, but her phone was left behind, wiped clean. Whoever had killed her knew exactly what they were doing, erasing any trace of their involvement. It seemed calculated. But killers, even the smart ones, always leave something behind. On the kitchen counter, a crumpled piece of paper caught my eye. It was a receipt for a coffee shop downtown, timestamped just the day before her murder. A meeting? I thought. Someone had to have been there with her. I pocketed the receipt and headed to her workplace, the Chronicle. It was a local newspaper that had somehow survived the digital age, still holding on to the values of old-school investigative journalism. I'd heard of Rachel Monroe. She was known for going after stories that most people wouldn't dare touch. But even I was surprised by how much her editor, Frank Dwyer, seemed to be on edge. Rachel was one of our best, Frank said, lighting up another cigarette as he paced nervously. She'd been working on something big, real hush-hush. She kept saying it was going to blow the lid off a major corporation. Which one? I asked, trying to stay focused. I was getting impatient. Something wasn't sitting right with me. Frank hesitated for a moment before scribbling a name on a notepad and sliding it over. Halcyon Enterprises. She'd been digging into their CEO, Victor Kane. Victor Kane. That name stirred something inside me. Kane wasn't just any businessman, he was a titan. Cold, calculating, and ruthless. His company, Halcyon Enterprises, had fingers in virtually every pie in the city: tech, pharmaceuticals, real estate, you name it. And if Rachel had something on him, it had to be big. Big enough for someone to want her dead. Back at the precinct, I started pulling up everything I could find on Halcyon Enterprises. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how murky the waters around them were. Lawsuits that had vanished overnight, whistleblowers who recanted their statements, government contracts that didn't quite add up. Money trails that ended in the sand. Everything pointed to one thing: Halcyon wasn't just a company, it was a kingdom. And Victor Kane was its king. He ruled it with an iron fist, and those who crossed him, well, they had a tendency to disappear. I needed a way in. So I set up a meeting with Kane himself. His office was in a glass tower, a monolith that seemed to look down on the city as if it were his personal kingdom. I wasn't intimidated, but I had to admit it was hard not to feel small in that kind of space. The walls were made of clear, reflective glass that stretched endlessly, showing the city below. Everything about the building screamed power, cold, calculated power. When I entered his office, he greeted me with a slick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was tall, well-dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, his features sharp as a blade. His presence was commanding, even more so than I had imagined. "Detective Thorne," Kane said, his voice smooth as velvet. He offered his hand. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Rachel Monroe," I replied bluntly. "She was working on a story about your company. Now she's dead. Care to comment?" His smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. But that was all I needed. A crack in his armor. "A tragedy," he said, leaning back in his chair, looking entirely too comfortable. "But I'm afraid I didn't know Ms. Monroe personally. I didn't buy it. Not for a second." Kane was too polished, too rehearsed. His carefully chosen words didn't match the coolness in his eyes. He was hiding something, and I was going to find it. On my way out, something caught my attention. A framed photo on Kane's desk. He was at a charity gala, his hand in the air shaking with a man I recognized as Senator Lawson. Behind them, barely visible, was Rachel Monroe holding a notepad, probably taking notes. It hit me. Rachel hadn't just been investigating corporate corruption. She had been digging into something even bigger: political ties. The senator was connected to Kane's empire, and Rachel had been chasing that connection. But why kill her? What was Kane so desperate to hide? Back at the precinct, the break came in the form of a phone call from the lab. They had found fibers under Rachel's fingernails. Expensive fibers, the kind you'd find on custom-tailored suits. Guess who's known for wearing those suits? Kane. I got a warrant, and the next day we raided Kane's mansion. It was as opulent as you'd expect. A sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, high up on a hill with a view that could make a king feel invincible. Inside, the house was just as cold and sterile as I imagined. No warmth, no life, just high-end furniture and the faint scent of expensive cologne. The safe behind the bookshelf wasn't hard to find. And when I opened it, I found more than I could have hoped for. Rachel's laptop was tucked inside, along with a collection of documents. And the documents? They were damning. Proof of illegal experiments Halcyon had been conducting overseas. Human testing. Unapproved drugs. Vulnerable populations being used as lab rats. Kane had been covering it all up, using bribes and blackmail to silence anyone who dared speak out. But that wasn't the worst part. Among the documents were a series of emails, private, encrypted exchanges between Kane and several high-ranking government officials, including Senator Lawson. They were discussing the illegal experiments, government contracts for military research, and how to conceal everything with political connections. Kane had been using his influence to run a shadow empire, and Rachel Monroe had uncovered it all. She had been ready to expose the truth. But someone had stopped her before she could publish. The way Rachel had been killed was intimate, personal. Strangulation. Whoever had done it had gotten close, held her down, made sure she didn't struggle. They knew her. And they knew exactly what she was about to uncover. As the weight of the discovery sank in, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that always tightened when you realize just how far the rabbit hole goes. Kane hadn't just murdered a journalist. He had silenced the last voice capable of exposing the monster he'd become. And the worst part? He hadn't done it alone. I turned to my partner, Detective Lisa Carter, who had been by my side through thick and thin. She was the practical one, always thinking 2 steps ahead, and right now I could tell she was processing everything just as quickly as I was. "So what now?" Lisa asked, her tone low but sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "We go after Kane," I said, my voice steady, but I knew there was no easy way to take down someone like him. He had too much power, too many resources. But I wasn't backing down. Not now, not after what we'd uncovered. We spent the next few days working around the clock, building the case. Kane was a ghost, but the evidence we'd found in his mansion was more than enough to bring him down. The fibers, the laptop, the documents, they all painted a picture of a man who had been playing God for far too long. And now it was time to bring him to justice. But as we prepared for the arrest, something shifted. Kane's empire wasn't just a business, it was a fortress, one built on secrets and blood. I knew that going after him would mean making powerful enemies, ones who could make this whole thing disappear before it ever saw the light of day. The deeper we dug, the more I realized just how much was at stake. Not just for me but for the city, for everyone. The day we finally moved in on Kane, it wasn't with the usual fanfare. No press conference, no spotlight. We moved quietly, strategically. His mansion was surrounded by a small army of security, but we had a plan, and for once, everything fell into place. When we entered the mansion, I could feel the eyes of his empire on me. But I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. Kane was sitting behind his desk, his smug smile gone. He knew we were coming, but the shock in his eyes when we slammed the cuffs on him told me everything I needed to know. He never thought it would happen. You think this is the end? Kane sneered as we led him out of his office, his hands bound behind his back. You think you can take me down? I have connections you'll never even know about. I looked him in the eye, feeling a cold resolve settle in my chest. I don't need to know about your connections, Kane. I just need to know the truth. And you're going to tell me everything. The trial was a spectacle. The media was all over it, the public outraged at the level of corruption we had uncovered. But Kane's lawyers were as slick as he was, and every step of the way they fought tooth and nail to get him off. They threw everything at us. Attempted bribery, media manipulation, threats. But it wasn't enough. I had the truth on my side. And the truth was unstoppable. When the verdict came down, I could hardly believe it. Guilty on all counts. Kane's empire came crashing down in a matter of days. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the city, and within weeks, Halcyon Enterprises was nothing more than a name in the history books. But even as I watched the empire crumble, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was still out there. Kane was just one piece of the puzzle, one cog in a much larger machine. The question was, how many more pieces were still in play? I stood there watching the reporters flood the courthouse, knowing that Rachel's death hadn't been in vain. She had uncovered a truth that had saved countless lives. But I also knew this wasn't over. The devil might have been in the details, but there were always more details to uncover. And I was ready to find them.